Chapter 26. Red Tape. His face was completely different. In the morning, Hermione had changed it. She was so skillful with this kind of spells that even Sunrise faltered at the moment seeing him. It had been only a moment, though. The next, she was smiling smug, climbing on his lap and pulling his now blonde, whitish thin hair. "You look like Daddy," she said. "I'll take it as a compliment," he answered, chuckling. He still couldn't believe to have her with him again. It was almost like living a dream and expecting to wake up any moment. But it wasn't. She was there, her wild curls framing her chubby face, looking at him lovingly. Suddenly, he asked himself how could have even only contemplated to abandon her, to leave his child alone. He had lived in a haze since Ginny's death, a haze made of toxic feelings and actions, and even when he thought to have his mind clear, it had never been really so. At times clouded by anger, at times clouded by delusion, at times clouded by numbing grief. Never clear. But as a veil was lifted, he had finally succeeded in freeing his mind. Actually, to be honest, he hadn't succeeded in anything of the kind. It was Sunrise who had lifted with her simple presence. When, in the living room, he heard her voice, it had been a sheer shock. He had made for the spring of it in a trance, not even aware of having left the windowsill. Seeing her had been odd. The haze, the confusion, the unstoppable buzz in his head had finally collapsed, freeing him. And holding her had been one of the best sensations ever felt. He was as though a piece of him he hadn't realized he was missing was only then restored. And that strong bond they shared made him tremble, thinking what she could have endured if he had succeeded in his self-destructive purpose. Now, with a mind finally free, he reproached himself harshly for it, for having considered to abandon her, the boys, Ted, and, no less important, Hermione. After all she had done for him, all the time she had strived to save his life, he was repaying her, finishing the deed himself. But then, he considered, perhaps it had been necessary. Having seen Ginny and Lily had helped him understand his error. It consoled him and gave him the strength to bear what was necessary to bear. Had he been real, or only in his head? The same question as when 17 presented itself again. Dumbledore had affirmed that, notwithstanding it was in his head, didn't mean it wasn't real. The full meaning of it escaped him then, and still now, he was at a loss. It had felt so real. But then, most of his dreams had the same characteristic, and weren't so. He didn't know. Probably never would, if not at his death, and maybe not even then. But it didn't matter. He liked to think it had been indeed real, and the thought that Ginny was severely supervising him was a prod in behaving as best as he could. He kissed Sunrise, still overwhelmed by the thought of having her there. He hadn't slept well since she had been back. Every few hours he felt impelled to go and check to make sure it hadn't been a dream, and she was fine. He thanked his lucky star for having placed Hermione on his path when a boy. He owed her everything, even his reunion with Sunrise. Without Hermione, he would never been able to take her back in fear of hurting her further. He was sorry to be unable to love Hermione as she wished. He would have liked to be able to, but there was no use in trying. That feeling was either there or not. He could have probably shared the house with her, even the same bed, making love with her and cuddling her as he had done with Ginny. But it would have always felt only like a friendship to him. He couldn't make her happy. He truly wished to see her so, but he had not the power to accomplish that. There was nothing he could do to change his feeling, as there was nothing that could be done to change hers. Now she was smiling at him, and he wondered how he could have failed to notice all that love for him for all those years. It seemed so blatant now. Her eyes, her demeanor couldn't hide it. Maybe his love for Ginny had blinded him. Maybe he had never looked at her so closely as in the last few days. However, he wasn't going to get profit of it anymore. Now he could let her go. She had helped him more than she would probably ever know. A debt, Harry felt, couldn't be paid back. And the debt was only increasing since she had decided to help me throughout the whole preparation for the moving out. She was going back and forth from Romania to be able to take care of you as well. It was tiring, and Harry tried to dissuade her from it, but she didn't want to hear reasons. Only the night before, while Sunrise was sleeping, she had helped him out with the necessary papers to carry out all his decision. "This is the deed to 12 Grimmauld Place," she told him, easing out a sheet of paper between a pile of documents. "Sign it here, here, and there," she said, pointing to different spots on the paper. "For signature by hand, the others with your wand." He did as he was ordered, and giving it back to her. "You won't tell Ted until I'll be away. He won't accept it otherwise." He was leaving him the place. When he had taken him back unconscious and almost froze to death after his first comforting visit, Harry had strolled around the house before to renovate him. It was several years he hadn't been in there. The house was full of their presents and belongings. Victoria's clothes were in the wardrobe, her cosmetics on the sink in the bathroom. In the studio, all Ted's books were on a shelf. They had glued a picture of them on the ghastly family tree, covering almost completely. The stuffed house elves' heads all sported colourful knitted wool hats, and they had painted fresh every wall, giving the house a sense of freshness and light. Sirius' mother portrait was not covered anymore, and she had lost much of her severity. She greeted him haughtily, sitting on an adorned chair, while Cratchit, after a quick bow in his direction, rushed to serve her a drink that she sipped, keeping a watchful eye on Harry. The place was already theirs. Only his signature was needed to confirm it, and there was no reason to hesitate. He didn't need the house. He had never actually even wanted it. What he wanted was only to know they could be happy in there without financial preoccupation. He had moreover left a legacy for him, to refurnish the house if he wished, or to do whatever he wanted with it. Ted never allowed him to do anything of the kind in the past, and he knew he would never have allowed him to do still if consulted. That's why Harry was doing everything on the sly, to avoid his rectitude to be in the way. Moreover, he had left him as well another kind of legacy too. He had collected all the memories regarding Lupin he possessed in some bottles, and had asked everybody who knew him to do the same. There wasn't that much, but, as Ted had said, it was better than nothing at all. And he reproached himself not to have thought about it sooner. He was planning to bring it to Grimmauld Place just before to leave. "Those are the Gringotts one," Hermione said, extracting a stack from the pile. "Sign your initials on every page and 2 full signatures with your wands on the last one." He had taken 2 vaults for James and Albus. In each there was enough to buy a flat in London, or wherever they wished. It was a small fortune for each. The vaults were in their names, but only with his present or bills they could get the money out of it. Harry, knowing Jem's temperament, didn't want to run the risk of him, more than Albus, squandering everything in frivolities. Bill had agreed on keeping an eye and advised them at his best. James liked Bill, and Harry was sure that under his supervision they would have thrived in any path they would have decided to follow after Hogwarts. He hoped very much they might consider following him. For his personal pleasure, of course, but also for their sake. It was a chance for them to live a normal life, far from possible dangers and twisted interactions. However, he couldn't expect it, nor exact it. "What are you going to do with this house?" Hermione asked, retrieving the deed and studying it attentively. "I'll keep it," he said, resolute. He would never have sold it. Too much had happened between those walls. They enclosed all the happiest memories of his life. He would never have parted from it. And who knows? Perhaps one day an adult Sunrise would have wished to see the place where she had lived her too brief period with her mom. He was not going to deprive her of such precious opportunity. "Okay," she nodded. "I'll take care of it while you are away. I'm going to be here on summer and Christmas anyway." "Ah!" she exclaimed, taking an envelope from the pile. "That Regina girl wrote to you," she said, handing him the letter with a disapproving frown. Hermione didn't approve much of her, as Harry very well knew. She had the chance to meet her briefly, time to time, and she hadn't gathered such a favourable impression. Harry had tried to speak in her favour. There was much behind the showy element that merited praise, but Hermione hadn't been much convinced. Harry sniggered, seeing her expression. "It's surely another letter of please." "Please?" Hermione asked while he was unfolding the letter. "Yeah, I've been to her place a couple of days ago to explain I was moving away, and she's not very keen on me going." He was an euphemism. Apprehending the news, she had burst into tears, strangely enough not affecting her heavy makeup at all, and had begged him not to go. On understanding his determination, she had then started to plead to be taken with him, and, on his refusal even to hear her reasons, in the space of just 2 days he had been pelted with no less than 6 letters with a vowel of eternal love, devotion, pleas, entreaties, and whatever her enthusiastic young mind suggested her. After having read it, he passed it with a smirk to Hermione, who, keeping a sceptical eyebrow arched for the whole lecture, perused it quickly. "My God!" she said when getting to the last sentence, where she was basically announcing her intention of secluding herself from the world for Harry's sake. "To be young again, eh? Were we the same at her age?" Harry laughed, amused. "You surely wasn't. I had basically already James at her age. She is certainly much more impetuous than we were." "Certainly," she replied primly, giving him back the letter. "I almost feel pity for the poor kid." "She'll be fine," Harry said, folding the letter and going to store it with all the order he wanted to take with him abroad. "She'll probably find a boyfriend next week and totally forget I ever existed." When he got back to his seat, he rubbed his hand. "So, are we done?" "Quite," she replied, gathering all the papers and storing them in a folder. "Do you need anything?" Harry asked, smiling. "Do you need anything my name can give you? I have no scruples in using it if you do." Hermione simpered. "No, thank you, Harry. I appreciate it, but I'm fine." "If you change your mind, let me know. My name is at your service, since you kindly allowed me to use yours," he said with a slight mocking bow. She laughed, collecting all the folders and quills and storing them neatly in her briefcase, but then sobered up suddenly. "What?" Harry asked, seeing that change of demeanor. "Actually, there would be something." she said, hesitant. It's not really for me, but it's something that has been bothering me for a while. Well, tell me. If I can help, I certainly do. Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but after a quick glance in his direction, didn't utter a word. Harry, imagining the reason behind the hesitation, put her out of her uneasiness. Is it regarding Ginny? He asked, somber. Hermione nodded, her finger clasping the briefcase she had just closed. Go ahead. It's fine, he encouraged her. It's not really regarding her, she started saying, but after the accident, Ernest Goodwin has been suspended with the accuse of incompetence. He didn't get his job back, and I doubt he will ever do. One more, I don't think that after such a scandal it will be easy for him to find another employment. His name has been stained by it. Hermione stopped speaking, observing him carefully. Harry, after the first moment of astonishment, grew determined. Give me back paper and quill. I'll write to the minister and to Percy so it can get print in the Daily Prophet. What do you think about law enforcement? He asked, while already scribbling vehemently on the paper Hermione had quickly provided. Chapter 27. I'm leaving England. For good. Harry left his chair, letting sunrise down. He was ready to go for what would have been a very difficult visit. Hermione had given the last touch to his face to make sure the incantation was going to last as long as possible, and there was nothing else to be done but go into Hogwarts. The anonymity was indispensable. He couldn't run the risk to be recognized. Only the thought filled him with dread. It was already days he was hardening his mind against this task that was surely going to be challenging. Albus, reminding him of Ginny in every feature, and James, in his endeavours to punish him for her death. Once in front of the Hogwarts gate, he was debating on how to make his presence noticed. A Patronus was the best solution, but addressing it to McGonagall there was the risk of announcing himself in front of some other people other than her, and he couldn't take the chance. Pondering on how to work around the problem, he took his wand from the pocket. He smirked as an idea was taking form, steadied his arm, concentrated every thought on the feeling of embracing his daughter again, and, before he was aware, a huge silvery phoenix was shooting out from his wand in a powerful dart. Flapping energetically her long and graceful wings, was soon out of sight. Only a few days before, he wouldn't have been able to cast one. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to cast any magic at all. As he was opening to the fact that his Patronus hadn't changed shape again, despite he had had strong emotions enough, the caretaker, a middle-aged man slightly limping, appeared. He told him he needed to speak with the headmistress. "Who do I have to announce?" he asked, with a gravelly voice. "Romulus Lupin," he said, stern on the outside and sniggering in the inside. Only a few minutes later, he was sitting in her office. All the portraits were looking inquiringly at him, who hadn't opened his mouth. Only Dumbledore had evidently recognized him, as smiled and winked as soon as he went in, but they didn't exchange a word. McGonagall stormed in the office seconds later, flushed and raging madly. "If this is a joke, it's not funny! I won't allow this lack of respect!" boomed once inside. "Who are you?" she added, eyeing him suspiciously, her hand ready close to the folding of her cloak to grasp her wand. "It's me, Professor," he simply said, standing up. His voice hadn't changed, unlike his appearance. "Potter?" she stammered, the colour draining fast from her face. Harry nodded, as the portraits around the room whispered excitingly. all besides Dumbledore, who was still smiling sadly. She gaped and didn't move for a second. Then, her eyes filled with tears. She walked swiftly towards him and pinned him tightly in her arms. Harry was so taken aback that for a moment stood still, stunned, incapable to move. Then, touched by this unexpected outburst of emotion from a woman usually so severe and composed, returned the hug, feeling more than ever how difficult it was going to be to say goodbye to all those people who in the course of his life had showed him a sincere affection. When McGonagall broke the hug up, she tapped her tears composedly with a handkerchief tugged from an invisible pocket in her robe. "I'm sorry, Potter," she mumbled, returning to her severe self in a blink, turning around the desk and sitting on a chair, only slightly sniffing, her eyes rimmed red. The portrait in front of this excess had been brought to silence, all gawking round eyes. "It's quite all right, Professor." "I'm glad to see you here." And she couldn't know how many meanings the simple sentence could hide. She began, but she paused soon after, and Harry, understanding what she wanted to convey, waved her not to proceed. "I know," he only said. She nodded sternly, straightened, folded her hands on the desk, and cleared her voice. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here to see James and Albus." "I see. It can be done, of course. I'll give you an empty classroom where you can talk undisturbed." "Thanks. I might as well tell you the reason." He spoke purposefully. And the silence fell into the room at his words. "I'm leaving England. For good. It's confidential, and I don't wish this information to spread in the magical community." McGonagall startled at this piece of information, while all the porters started to buzz excitedly once again, moving frame to frame to confabulate. "Leave England? What do you mean, Potter?" "I cannot live here anymore. It's too stressful. I don't cope well with all these." He waved in the air, indicating something around them. "Insanity around me. I need a place where I can walk around without having to resort to spells to change my face." His affirmation was followed by a short pause. McGonagall stared hard at him, then sighed, took her wand lazily, and made appear a glass of her whiskey. "One for you too, Potter?" He shook his head. She took the glass, warily observed it for a moment, and then took a small sip, grimacing slightly after having gulped it down. "Perfect vintage," she murmured under her voice, putting the glass down. "May I ask where you are going?" she asked in the end, turning his gaze back to him. Harry stood up. There was a map in the room. He placed a finger on a precise spot. "As soon as I'll have a place, I'll send the address, which obviously must remain secret." McGonagall's eyes lingered on the map while he was getting back to his chair. "Quite far afield," she muttered. "Very far afield," she repeated. "There are no wizards or witches living there," Harry said as an explanation. She then looked at Dumbledore, who was the only one not joining the whispering amid frames. "What do you think, Albus?" "Go ahead, my boy," he said encouragingly, addressing Harry. "I've always knew this was going to happen sooner or later. Alas, popularity means only loneliness in your case." "Yes, but what about the kids?" she asked, frowning, turning from one to the other. "I'll ask them what they prefer to do," Harry explained tranquil. "If they want to come with me, I'll tutor them, and they might come here just for exams. But I won't force them to. If they prefer to attend Hogwarts, it's fine by me. And I'm inclined to think that this is what is going to happen." And concluded, trying to hide a flicker of uneasiness, "at least in regards of James. From what I can gather hanging here, I'm afraid it would be better for him to follow you." Dumbledore affirmed, looking meaningfully at Harry through his half-moon spectacles. McGonagall, hearing this, nodded and turned his attention back to Harry. I'm sorry to give you bad tidings, Potter. I avoided any letter not to add to your afflictions, but James... She cleared her voice, unsure how to proceed, took another sip of her drink, grimaced, and looked back at him purposedly. I believe he's taking a bad turn. His marks are dropping drastically, and he's starting to be much more rebellious and ungovernable. I tried repeatedly to talk to him, but to no avail. He turned a deaf ear. I'm not sure Hogwarts is really benefiting him. Other students adore him for your sake, and this is making him boastful and disrespectful of rules. Since the accident, the situation has degenerated, she concluded, somehow, with a lower tone. Harry sighed, sitting back on his chair, rubbing his face, his gaze drifting from them. I can hardly force him away, he muttered after a while. He is almost of age. He is old enough to decide for himself. He might want to come, McGonagall said, awful, bringing back his attention. You are his father, after all, and he had always looked up to you. Harry smiled bitterly. It's Hearth. He is not looking up to me. He will never agree to come with me. A silence settled down on them. Despite what McGonagall had just said, they both knew how things really stood. Even the portrait had stopped whispering, and they were all looking concernedly at them. Phineas Nigellus was nodding severely to Harry's last sentence. Only Dumbledore had retained his serene demeanour. You know, my boy, he said in the end, often what he looks like and what really is are quite different. He paused and scratched his nose. Totally different, I might say, he added. Another pause followed, in which both Harry and McGonagall looked at him inquiringly. He smiled. Who knows this truth better than yourself?